The world had changed in a way no one could have imagined. Once cities stood proud with lights that reached into the night sky, markets filled with laughter, and families gathered without fear. But now everything was broken. Streets were silent, buildings stood empty, and the air carried the weight of loss. Humanity was at the edge of collapse, and everyone knew it. The enemy pressing against them was unlike anything they had ever faced before. Their technology was stronger, their strategies smarter, and their numbers endless. Every battle ended the same way. Human ships shattered, human armies scattered, and another territory lost. For years, people had fought back. Soldiers gave their lives in desperate resistance. Engineers worked night and day, building weapons they hoped could match the enemy's power. Politicians tried to hold nations together, but one after another, governments crumbled under the pressure. Cities that once represented hope were turned into ruins. Families moved underground, hiding in shelters, living on scraps. The idea of tomorrow was slipping away, and the word extinction no longer sounded like science fiction. It felt real. Among the ruins of this world, a small group of survivors gathered in a hidden facility. They were not soldiers in shining armor or heroes from books. They were ordinary people with extraordinary responsibility. Some were scientists, others were leaders, and a few were simply those who had refused to give up. They sat in a dimly lit room, staring at each other with hollow eyes. The question on the table was the same one they had avoided for years. What do we do now? There were no easy answers. Everyone knew humanity was running out of time. Supplies were running low, energy sources were nearly gone, and morale had collapsed. The enemy's ships patrolled the skies, their forces controlled the land, and their influence crept deeper every day. No one had beaten them, and no one knew how. For weeks, the group had debated solutions. They spoke of hidden resources, secret plans, new weapons, but deep down they all knew these were nothing but fragile hopes. Every plan ended in failure before it even began. It was then that one of them mentioned the unthinkable, a possibility so dangerous that even saying it aloud felt like betrayal. Somewhere in the vastness of the galaxy, there existed a species no one dared to approach. Records from ancient civilizations described them not as allies or neighbors, but as nightmares given flesh. They thrived in chaos, lived for war, and survived in the harshest corners of the universe where no other life could exist. They were called many names, but in every story they were the same: unstoppable, ruthless, and deadly. The galaxy feared them, and for good reason. The idea of calling them for help sounded like madness. They were not saviors, they were predators. To ask them for aid would mean placing humanity in the hands of beings who saw weakness as an opportunity. No one in the room wanted to consider it. But as silence hung heavy, the reality sank in. There were no other options left. The debate grew heated. Some argued that contacting such a species was the same as giving up completely. Better to fall to the current enemy than invite something worse. Others said survival, no matter the cost, was worth trying. "We are already dying," one of them whispered, voice trembling. "If there is even the smallest chance they might fight for us, isn't it better than waiting here until the last of us fades away?" The words cut through the silence. Every face in that room carried fear, but also something else: desperation. They had seen children go hungry, families torn apart, soldiers fighting battles they could never win. They had watched friends vanish, neighbors disappear, and entire cities erased from existence. Hope was gone. And when hope dies, even the most dangerous choices begin to look like salvation. The decision was not made with pride or courage. It was made with trembling hands, tired hearts, and the bitter taste of survival. They would send a message into the void of space, a call not to friends or allies, but to monsters. It was their final chance and maybe their final mistake. The work began immediately. In the silence of the underground facility, machines hummed as the signal was prepared. Old technology, half broken and patched together with whatever scraps remained, was set up for one purpose: to carry humanity's plea into the stars. The message itself was simple. It spoke of humanity's struggle, their enemy, their losses, and their desperation. It did not try to hide weakness. It did not pretend to be strong. It was raw, honest, and filled with the last ounce of courage they could muster. Some of the group couldn't bear to watch. They turned away, tears in their eyes, afraid of what this choice meant. Others stood tall, forcing themselves to believe they were doing the right thing. No one knew how the deadly species would respond, or if they would respond at all. Perhaps the message would be ignored. Perhaps it would bring destruction faster. But at least for the first time in years, they were doing something. When the signal finally left the transmitter, It felt like releasing a breath they had all been holding for too long. It vanished into the blackness of space, carrying with it humanity's last hope. The room fell silent, heavy with fear. What they had done could never be undone. The thought lingered in every mind. Had we just saved ourselves, or had we signed our own death sentence? Outside, the world remained broken. Families still huddled in the cold. Soldiers still fought hopeless battles, and the enemy's shadow still stretched across the earth. But deep underground, in that hidden room, a new kind of silence had settled. It was not the silence of defeat, but the silence of waiting. They had made the call. Now all that remained was to see who or what would answer. The moment the signal was sent, the weight of it sank heavily on everyone's shoulders. It wasn't like pressing a button and forgetting about it. Every single person in that hidden facility knew that what they had done could never be undone. A message had been launched into the void of space, carrying humanity's desperate plea, and there was no way to pull it back. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff shouting into a storm, not knowing if someone or something was going to shout back. For a long while, no one spoke. The machines still hummed softly. The lights flickered from the strain of old generators, and the stale air seemed thicker than ever. Some of the people had their heads bowed, unable to meet each other's eyes. Others stared blankly at the transmitter as if expecting it to explode. They had broken a silent rule, a rule unspoken across the galaxy: never call them. Never invite the monsters in. The records about this species were scattered, old, and filled with contradictions. Some stories claimed entire civilizations had been wiped out after making contact. Others whispered that they took what they wanted, leaving nothing behind but ashes. Yet there were also fragments, small hints that once in a very rare moment they had fought against common enemies. No one knew the truth. The only thing clear was that they were feared above all others. That fear had kept humanity, and countless other species, from ever reaching out. Until now, people began to argue quietly, their voices carrying the edge of panic. One person muttered that they had just invited extinction. Another said maybe the message wouldn't even reach them. Space is endless, someone whispered. Signals get lost. Maybe they'll never hear it. The words carried a fragile kind of hope, the kind people cling to when they're too afraid to face reality. But deep inside, everyone knew the truth. If these beings existed as the record said, then they would hear. The waiting was torture. Hours felt like days, and days stretched into weeks. Every night the survivors slept with unease, ears tuned to the skies as if expecting them to roar open with fire. Every morning people woke with the same question heavy in their minds. Had we made a mistake? Some regretted it already. They said humanity should have faced its end with dignity, rather than begging to predators. Others argued back, saying there was no dignity in extinction. Survival was survival, no matter how ugly it looked. Life outside the facility didn't grow easier either. The enemy continued its advance. More shelters fell. Entire towns disappeared from the maps. People hid in forests and caves and crumbling ruins, clutching the last pieces of food and water they had. Everyone felt the growing shadow. Even those who didn't know about the forbidden message could feel that something was reaching its breaking point. Meanwhile, those inside the facility carried a new kind of fear. Not only did they fear the enemy already crushing them, but now they also feared who might come in response. At night, some couldn't sleep, haunted by visions of towering figures with burning eyes, claws tearing through walls, voices demanding submission. The human imagination painted them as devils in every shape possible, because sometimes the unknown is worse than the truth. Still, hope refused to die completely. A few clung to the chance, just the smallest chance, that these beings might not be the monsters everyone said they were. Maybe the old records were exaggerated. Maybe they were not destroyers but protectors. After all, legends have a way of growing darker with every retelling. If they were truly so evil, one person said softly, wouldn't the galaxy already belong to them? No one answered because it was a question that made too much sense. Weeks passed in silence. Nothing came. The sky remained empty, the stars distant and quiet. The transmitter sat still in the corner of the room, lifeless now, as if mocking them for the hope they had placed in it. Some began to laugh bitterly, calling the entire attempt foolish. They said the monsters either didn't exist or didn't care. Others quietly breathed relief, thinking maybe the message had disappeared into the void after all. But then, one night the silence broke. It began with a tremor, Soft at first, like the ground shifting beneath tired feet. People inside the facility froze. Instruments lit up suddenly, picking up signals too strong, too sharp, too alien to be from the enemy they already knew. The screens flickered with strange patterns, unreadable codes, and energy levels far beyond what any human technology had ever seen. The air seemed to vibrate as though the very planet was aware of something approaching. Panic spread quickly. Some rushed to the control panels, trying to make sense of the signals. Others backed away, whispering prayers, tears forming in their eyes. This was it, the answer to their call. Whether salvation or damnation, it was here. Minutes later, the night sky split open. People across the world saw it. From hidden shelters, broken cities, and the dark forests where survivors huddled, eyes turned upward as light tore through the atmosphere. Massive shapes descended, their silhouettes outlined by the glow of burning skies. These were not ships like the enemy's, sleek and sharp. These were something else. Larger, heavier, built not with elegance but with raw, terrifying power. Those who saw them couldn't breathe. Some collapsed to their knees. Others clutched their children close, and many simply stared, too shocked to move. The galaxy's most deadly species had answered. They had come. Inside the facility, no one spoke. Hearts pounded, mouths went dry, and fear pressed down like a storm. The message had worked. Humanity had reached out to the monsters of the stars, and the monsters had replied. But what they would do next, that remained unknown. The waiting had ended, but the true fear was only just beginning. The first sighting of those ships left people shaken to their core. For days, survivors across the world spoke of nothing else. Some swore they saw ships the size of mountains, their shadows covering entire valleys. Others claimed they heard strange sounds in the sky, like thunder that never ended. A few said they felt the ground itself vibrate, as though the planet was bracing for something beyond human understanding. No one could agree on the details, but everyone agreed on one thing: they had arrived. Inside the facility, silence was now constant. No one laughed, no one made small talk. Every conversation circled back to one question: what are they going to do with us? At first, some thought the worst had already happened. They expected fire raining down from the sky, cities crushed, oceans boiling. But none of that came. The ships lingered high above the atmosphere, silent and unmoving, as if watching. That stillness was almost worse than an attack. People waited, breath held, unsure whether the newcomers were deciding humanity's fate or simply enjoying the fear. Days passed, and nothing happened. Every sunrise brought fresh anxiety. Some survivors whispered that maybe the deadly species had no interest in Earth at all, that the ships were passing through, ignoring the desperate little planet beneath them. But others argued that monsters did not cross light years without purpose. If they were here for a reason. The waiting began to eat at people's minds. In the hidden shelters, parents tried to calm their children, telling them stories about protectors who might help. But even in their own voices, doubt crept in. Soldiers at the last human outposts kept their weapons ready, though deep inside they knew their rifles and rockets would mean nothing if these beings decided to strike. Scientists stared at screens filled with unreadable data, their hands shaking as they admitted they had no way of interpreting what they were seeing. At night, the fear was worse. The skies glowed faintly with the reflection of the ships, a reminder that something far greater than humanity was out there, waiting. People lay awake imagining what those beings looked like. Were they humanoid, with faces that could mimic kindness? Or were they beasts shaped only for war? Were they intelligent beyond comprehension? Or were they simply destroyers acting on instinct? The not knowing gnawed at everyone. The facility itself became a prison of thoughts. Every person there carried the same guilt. We sent the message. We invited them. They had done it to save their species, but now they wondered if they had doomed it instead. No one admitted it out loud, but the thought lingered. Maybe extinction by their first enemy would have been easier than this endless waiting under alien eyes. Rumors began to spread. Some swore that in the forests, strange figures had been seen moving in the dark. Others claimed that water supplies had been disturbed, as if someone or something was testing them. A group of survivors even said they heard voices carried by the wind, speaking in a language that wasn't human. Each rumor spread like fire, fueling terror. No one could prove any of it, but no one could dismiss it either. And then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the ships moved. One broke formation and descended lower, close enough that its vast shape blocked out the stars. Alarms rang inside the facility, though no one truly knew what they were supposed to do. Soldiers lifted weapons, hands shaking. Scientists clutched their notebooks as if words on paper could shield them. Ordinary people simply froze, hearts pounding so loudly it felt like the sound alone could draw attention. The ship didn't attack. It hovered. Lights pulsed along its surface, colors shifting in patterns too complex to be random. It was as if the ship itself was alive, breathing in the dark. Then came a sound. Not a voice exactly, but a vibration deep in the bones, felt rather than heard. People collapsed to their knees, covering their ears, though no noise filled the air. Some screamed, others cried silently, and a few stood in stunned awe. Whatever message it was sending, it was not one humans could easily understand. The vibration ended as quickly as it had begun. The ship slowly drifted back toward the formation, leaving silence heavier than before. People stared at each other, pale and trembling. Had that been a warning? A greeting? A test? No one knew. Outside the facility, humanity reacted in different ways. Some saw the ships as the beginning of salvation. They lit fires at night, hoping the visitors would notice, hoping they would come down and offer protection. Others treated them as executioners, falling into despair, preparing themselves for the end. In some shelters, people turned on each other, arguing whether calling them had been a mistake. Fights broke out, and in the chaos, some even said they wished the ships would just act, attack or save, but stop this endless waiting. Weeks stretched into months. The enemy that had once hunted humanity slowed its advance. Their ships no longer pressed as hard, their attacks seemed less frequent. Some wondered if they too feared the new arrivals. For the first time in years, the enemy hesitated. That single fact gave a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, the monsters from the stars were more terrifying to them than to humans. But still, the newcomers did nothing. They watched. They lingered. They studied. Humanity lived in the shadow of their presence, uncertain if they were prey, allies, or something in between. In the facility, sleepless nights piled on top of each other. People began to lose themselves in speculation. Why hadn't the beings made contact? Were they waiting for humans to break completely, to beg louder, to offer themselves without resistance? Or were they simply deciding whether humanity was worth saving at all? No answer came. The fear became a constant companion like air itself. Children were born under the glow of alien ships. Old men and women died without ever knowing the truth of why the visitors remained silent. Time stretched painfully, and the only thing anyone was sure of was this: the call had been heard, and the ones who answered were watching. Every soul on Earth lived under that gaze. Some clung to hope, whispering prayers to the sky, asking the silent giants to intervene. Others cursed them, calling them cowards for watching suffering without lifting a hand. But no matter the words, the feelings, or the prayers, nothing changed. The galaxy's most deadly species had arrived, and humanity was still waiting to learn if they had come as saviors or executioners. For months, humanity had lived under the shadow of those ships. They watched from the ground as the giants hovered in the sky, unmoving yet unyielding, like silent predators studying their prey. Fear had become routine. People no longer looked at the stars with wonder, but with dread. The children born during this time never knew a night without those massive shapes above them. And then, without warning, everything changed. It began with a single beam of light. One evening, as survivors huddled in the ruins of their shelters, a brilliant column of white descended from one of the ships. It struck the ground near the facility where the forbidden signal had first been sent. The light was so intense it painted shadows across entire valleys. People gasped, some cried, and many believed the end had finally come. The ground shook as figures emerged. Not machines, not drones, living beings. They stepped into the world with a presence so heavy, it was as if the air itself bent around them. They were taller than any human, their movements sharp yet controlled, carrying strength in every step. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, not with warmth but with a kind of fierce intensity that made even the bravest soldiers lower their gaze. No one spoke at first. The humans inside the facility stood frozen, staring as the newcomers approached. Every instinct screamed to run, to hide, but there was nowhere to go. This was the moment they had feared and waited for, the moment of truth. One of the beings stopped in front of the group. For a long silence, nothing happened. Then a voice broke through. It was not loud, but it carried power that shook every person to their core. The words were in a tongue that should have been incomprehensible, yet somehow every human understood. The voice asked a question that chilled them. "You called us, why?" The leader of the survivors stepped forward, though their legs trembled. Their voice cracked as they explained. They spoke of the war, the endless enemy, the fall of their cities, the starving children, the dying world. They spoke with honesty, not pride. There was no strength left to pretend. Humanity had reached its end, and in desperation they had sent the call. The alien stood silently, its gaze fixed on the trembling human. The others behind it remained still, watching like hunters deciding whether their prey deserved to live. When the leader finished speaking, silence followed. No one dared to move. Even the air felt heavy, as if holding its breath. Finally, the being spoke again. "You ask for help, yet what will you give in return?" The question hung like a blade in the room. What could humanity possibly offer to creatures who could shatter them with a thought? The leader lowered their head. They spoke of loyalty, of service, of doing whatever was asked if it meant survival. They begged not for power, not for wealth, but for the chance to live. The alien's eyes narrowed, glowing brighter for a moment. Then almost imperceptibly it nodded. "We will decide." With that, the beings turned and left, walking back into the beam of light that carried them to the sky. The humans remained frozen, their bodies shaking from fear, relief, and confusion. They had survived the first meeting. But what did "we will decide" mean? Was it a promise of help? Or a warning of judgment? The hours after the encounter felt unreal. Some fell to their knees in prayer, thanking the stars for sparing them. Others wept openly, their nerves shattered. A few remained silent, unable to process what had just happened. Humanity had stood face to face with the galaxy's most deadly species, and for the first time, those legends were no longer stories. They were real. Days passed with no further contact. The ships remained above, unmoving once again. But something had changed. The enemy who had tormented humanity for years began to withdraw. Their attacks grew fewer, their fleets retreating from contested skies. It was as if they too had seen the encounter, and whatever they witnessed was enough to shake even them. Still, uncertainty weighed heavy. The deadly beings had not promised alliance. They had not offered friendship. They had only listened and left. Humanity was left hanging between hope and terror, unsure if they had gained protectors or merely delayed their execution. Then, without warning, the visitors returned. This time their arrival was not quiet. The skies thundered as more ships descended. Beams of light tore through the night as the beings stepped onto the earth once again. But this time they did not come to talk. They came armed. The facility shook as their leader entered once more, towering over the humans. Its voice rang out, cold but clear. "We have decided." The room went silent, every human heart pounding. The alien paused, then spoke the words no one expected. "We will fight." Shock spread through the room. People stared at each other, mouths open, not daring to believe what they had heard. For a moment, hope flickered in their eyes, a dangerous, fragile hope. But the alien was not finished. "If we fight for you, you are ours. You will serve us not as equals, but as those who were saved. This is the price of survival." The words struck hard. They were not saviors in the way humans had dreamed of. They were conquerors offering protection in exchange for submission. Some felt outrage, others despair, but most felt only relief. To live, even under someone else's shadow, was better than dying. The leader of the humans bowed their head. With a trembling voice, they agreed. "We accept." The alien's burning eyes scanned the room as if measuring every soul. Then, for the first time, it spoke words that carried something close to finality. "Then your war is ours now." The room erupted into whispers, some in disbelief, some in prayer, some in tears. Humanity had made its choice. They had given their future away, but in exchange, they had gained something they could never have imagined. Warriors who could stand against the enemy that had brought them to their knees. The aliens turned to leave, their heavy steps echoing in the silence. As they entered the beam of light once more, the humans realized their world had shifted forever. Survival was no longer in their own hands. They had entrusted it to the very beings they had once feared most. Outside, the ships began to move, breaking their stillness at last. Engines roared, and formations shifted as if preparing for something monumental. The sky trembled under their power, and for the first time in years, Humanity saw the enemy ships retreating fully, fleeing into the darkness beyond the stars. The deadly species had chosen, and the war was about to change. When the deadly species declared, "Your war is ours now," the world shifted. For the first time in years, there was a glimpse of something humanity had forgotten: hope. But that hope was tangled with fear because everyone knew there would be a price. They had not come as friends. They had not come as saviors. They had come as warriors, and warriors never fought for free. The change was immediate. The skies above Earth, once filled with enemy fleets, were suddenly alive with fire and thunder. The deadly species unleashed power humanity had never imagined. Their ships moved like predators in the dark, tearing through enemy vessels with terrifying precision. Where human weapons had failed again and again, theirs carved paths of destruction with ease. Entire enemy fleets, once considered unstoppable, were obliterated in hours. For the first time in generations, humanity did not see defeat. They saw victory. From the ground, people watched in awe. Survivors hiding in the ruins lifted their eyes to the heavens and saw fire streaking across the sky. Children pointed at the flashes of light, their voices filled with wonder instead of fear. Soldiers, once broken and weary, stood straighter, gripping their weapons as if the fight had returned to them. Families in dark shelters whispered that maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was ending. But with the victories came a new kind of silence. Everyone realized what was happening. The war was no longer theirs. They were no longer the defenders of their world. They had handed that role away. The deadly species fought not as allies but as owners. Humanity was under their shadow now, and shadows can be cold. The battles that followed were unlike anything Earth had ever seen. Skies burned red, oceans boiled from the energy of weapons that split mountains, and the ground shook with every strike. The enemy that had crushed humanity for years tried to resist, but it was clear. They were terrified. These monsters from the stars fought with a brutality that broke their spirit. Where humans had fought with desperation, the deadly species fought with dominance. And yet, in the middle of all that destruction, the question remained: what would come after? People whispered about it in the shelters. Yes, humanity was being saved. But what was the price? Would these beings leave once the enemy was gone, or would they stay? And if they stayed, would Earth ever belong to humans again? The survivors in the facility, the same ones who had sent the forbidden signal, carried that weight more than anyone else. They had called the monsters, and now the monsters answered. Every victory felt like a double-edged sword. When they saw the enemy falling, their hearts lifted. But when they looked at their new protectors, standing tall with eyes burning like fire, their hearts sank again. The war ended faster than anyone believed possible. The enemy who had once seemed endless was shattered within weeks. Their fleets scattered, their armies destroyed, their grip on Earth broken. Humanity should have celebrated. They should have filled the streets with joy, lit fires of triumph, sung songs of survival. But there were no songs, no festivals, only silence. Because no one knew what would happen next. When the last enemy ship fell, the deadly species descended once more. Their leader stood before the humans, its towering figure casting long shadows in the ruined facility. Its voice, calm but terrifying, carried across the room. Your enemy is gone. Your world is free, and now you belong to us. The words struck harder than any weapon. The humans bowed their heads, too afraid to look into those burning eyes. They had known this moment was coming, but knowing did not make it easier. They had traded one conqueror for another. The only difference was that this conqueror had spared them instead of destroying them. Still, not everyone saw it as defeat. Some whispered that serving under them was better than being wiped out. Others said survival, no matter the cost, was worth it. But there were those who felt the weight of chains, invisible but heavy. They wondered if humanity had truly been saved, or if it had simply been transformed into something else. A vassal species, protected but never free. In the weeks that followed, the deadly species made their presence known. Their ships hovered like silent guardians. Their warriors patrolled ruined cities, their eyes always watching. They brought order where chaos had ruled, but it was not the kind of order humans had dreamed of. It was strict, unyielding, and absolute. Some humans resisted quietly, whispering of rebellion. Others accepted their fate, bowing to their new rulers. Most simply carried on, too exhausted to fight anymore, grateful only to be alive. Children grew up under the shadow of alien ships, learning that survival sometimes meant obedience. And yet, Despite the fear, something unexpected happened. Humanity learned. They watched the deadly species closely, studied their methods, their strategies, their way of surviving in a universe that feared them. They were not kind teachers, but they were examples of strength. For the first time, humans saw how fragile they had been, and how strong they could become if they adapted. The leader of the survivors often lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling of the shelter, wondering if they had made the right choice. They thought about the children who would never know the freedom their parents had lost. They thought about the battles that had saved them, but also about the chains they now wore. The guilt was heavy, but so was the reality. If they hadn't sent that signal, none of them would be alive. One night, the alien leader spoke again, addressing humanity not as equals but as possessions. Its words were chilling yet strangely honest. You feared us. You still fear us. That is good. Fear keeps you alive. But understand this, we do not fight for kindness. We fight because strength demands it. You are alive because you bent before us. Remember that and you will endure. Those words echoed across the world. Some hated them. Some accepted them. But all remembered them. And so humanity survived, not as the masters of their world, but as the protected of a greater power. They had called into the void out of desperation, and the void had answered with monsters. Monsters who saved them, yes, but also monsters who claimed them. The war was over. The reckoning had come. And though Earth still spun beneath the stars, every human who looked up at the sky knew the truth. Survival had come at a price. A price that would shape their future for generations, for now they lived. But the question lingered in every mind, a quiet whisper that refused to fade. What will the price of tomorrow be?